I love that that song that's about a welcome table has a no in it. Did you notice that? Sorry, that wasn't in the script, I apologize. Woo! I should have said no. What is this? What's, anybody know what this is? It's a Wonder Box? Does anybody want to, you think there's something in it? Can somebody open it up for me? Anybody? We don't care. We don't care what's in it? Come on, I want to know. So somebody come up and somebody come open it. Let's see what's in there. Let's see. Okay, what do we got? Okay. A scarf, a white scarf. Okay. What else we got in there? Okay. Would you hold on to these for me? Would you just for a little bit? I don't know what those are for, but maybe we'll find out later. So you can just take those over there, and I'll ask you for them if I need them later. I'm not sure what that's about. We do have a story this morning, though. It's called The Cloud Spinner, and it's by Michael Catchpool. There was once a boy who could weave cloth from the clouds. He had a spinning wheel and a loom on top of a hill. And as the clouds passed, with the whir of the wheel, he would spin them into thread. Gold in the morning with the rising sun, white in the afternoon, and crimson in the evening, just as his mother had taught him. And then, with a clickety-clack of his loom, he would weave the thread into cloth. And as he worked, he sang a simple tune his mother taught him. Enough is enough, and not one stitch more. The boy was wise. He spun just enough thread and wove just enough cloth to make two scarves. Two items of clothing. One was of pure white that he wore over his head when it was hot to protect him from the sun. The other he wore when it was cold. It was a twist and a twirl of gold and white and crimson, soft as a mouse's touch and warm as chestnuts. His mother had taught him well. Wait a second. A scarf with a twirl of gold and white and crimson? What, can I get those scarves back? I found out what those are for. Can I have those back? Okay, we got a little crimson, we got a little white here, right? So we got the sunset, we got the clouds in the day, but I need some gold. Can you guys help me out? What? Oh, I've got the gold on already. Thank you. Okay, good. Okay, thank goodness. I got the gold on already. Okay, so we're gonna weave these together a little bit, just like that. I don't have a loom on the top of a hill, but we'll do our best. There we go. Okay. I think. A little thing like that. I think it was better before. So one day, one chilly market day, the boy walked down the hill with a basket in his hand and with his scarf around his neck. The market was filled with great excitement because the king was on his way. And soon the king rode grandly by, hardly noticing the curtsies and cheers. But what his greedy eye did notice was the beautiful scarf of gold and white and crimson. Tell me, boy, where can I get a scarf of such fine cloth? Nowhere on earth, the boy replied. Well, then how did you get yours? Said the king. I made it, said the boy. Then you will make another for me, a longer one, much longer, for I am the king. But the boy said it would not be wise to have a long scarf made from this cloth. Your Majesty does not need it, he said. How dare you tell me what is wise, shouted the king. I order you to make me that scarf. So the boy went home to the top of the hill, and with the whir of the wheel he began to spin. He spun the clouds as they passed in the morning and were gold in the rising sun. He spun in the afternoon as the clouds sailed past, white as snowdrifts. He spun in the evening when the clouds were crimson. And then with the clickety-clack of the loom, he wove the thread into a long, long scarf. The king was overjoyed. His scarf was as soft as a mouse's touch and as warm as roasted chestnuts. Now, he said, make me a cloak of this glorious cloth and dresses galore for the queen and my daughter, the princess. But the boy shook his head. It would not be wise to have so many clothes made from this cloth. Your Majesty does not need them. Well, the king's face was a twist of scowls. I want those clothes. I order you to make them. So once again, the boy went home to the top of the hill, and with the whir of the wheel, he began to spin. He spun the clouds as they passed in the morning and were gold in the rising sun. He spun in the afternoon as the clouds sailed past, white as snowdrifts. He spun in the evening when the clouds were crimson. He spun, and it got harder and harder because there were fewer and fewer clouds. At last, with the clickety-clack of his loom, the boy began to weave the thread into cloth beneath a cloudless sky. Enough is enough, and not one stitch more, he sang sadly as he worked. Well, the king was delighted. He put on the wonderful cloak, and the queen and the princess each put on a flowing dress. Surely, he boasted, there's no king as magnificent and as wise as me. Not one, said the queen. The princess, however, said nothing. But day after day, as they wore their marvelous clothes, not a drop of rain fell from that cloudless sky. Your Majesty, pleaded the villagers, our animals are thirsty and all our crops are dying. There's nothing I can do, shouted the king, walking this way and that, his cloak trailing behind him. Why are you moaning to me? The princess again said nothing. But that very evening, she quietly slipped out of the palace. She wore a simple dress, and in her arms was a bundle, soft as a mouse's touch and warm as roasted chestnuts. She crossed the dry, rusty gardens and the brown fields beyond and climbed to the top of the hill. Stepping forward, she knocked on the boy's door and asked, "Is it too late to undo what has been done?" The boy smiled and said simply, "There is still time." When the king awoke the next morning, he could not find his wonderful cloak. The queen could not find her beautiful dresses. They searched the palace for the clothes the boy had made, but they were gone. And then they looked outside and saw the villagers dancing for joy as rains began to fall from the clouds that filled the sky. It rained and rained and rained. The king and queen looked out and wondered. And the princess, with a smile as bright as a rainbow, stood on the top of the hill and sang, "Enough is enough, and not one stitch more." The end. It's quite an experience to be a UU minister with a reading. I did choose the reading, so it's my fault, but to have a reading where God is repeated over and over and over again, and you're sitting there going, how are people taking this? I hope the point of that essay, or that excerpt from that essay from Cynthia Ozick, comes across. I read that when I was a teenager in high school, and I found it so rich with spiritual insight. The idea that we need to say no to any particular thing always being the answer. Except perhaps maybe God, or I would say love, right? Wisdom, compassion. But wisdom and compassion have different forms in each moment. So we say no to the easy lure of the idea that any system, any way of thinking about things, or any particular thing, even all those good things, all those yeses, is the thing that will make life good and right and wonderful and happy and utopic. And instead, we focus on listening to that voice that asks us, is this loving action in this moment? Yes or no? What about this moment in the next moment? What about this moment in the next moment? And that spirit of love that is alive and changing is what we pledge our allegiance to. In addition to your financial pledge that you'll give to the church, starting next week. So I don't know about you, but I don't like to be told no. I don't like it when it comes from an external authority, and I don't like it when it comes from a voice within. There's something, I think, in the human psyche that rails against the setting of limits. We experience this from children when an adult says no and the child cries, or hits, or tries to negotiate, or just hides under the table to eat the cookie. And yet we know that setting limits is a good thing. We know the child benefits from going to sleep and getting enough sleep each night. We know as adults that we're better off if we get off that social media or whatever it is that keeps us up late at night so that we get enough sleep. We know that one stuffed animal can bring a child lasting happiness as they create worlds of play with it. But we also know that just accumulating more and more stuff, more and more teddy bears, eventually doesn't make us happy. Even though it's so much easier to say yes in the moment, to staying up just a little bit later, to making that purchase that will give us a little hit of dopamine. Even though it's easier, or keep the child from crying if you give them the ice cream cone that they're asking for, avoiding the tantrum, even though it's easier, we know that there are times when no is the answer. But we prefer yes. It just feels good, right? It's so much yummier. It makes me think of the phrase unconditional love, right? Unconditional love is yummy. It feels so good. But what about those times when we need to set limits? Isn't it interesting that we call that tough love? Right? Nobody wants to do tough love, and yet what tough love is that moment when the impulse to give in to yes, right, which you could say is actually even a distortion of unconditional love, right, a misunderstanding of that, is actually the wrong thing, right? And tough love is actually the loving thing, right? Setting those limits is actually the loving thing. So, we have this in our personal lives and in our interpersonal lives, but also societally, we have to admit that we're addicted to yes. Just like that king in the story who seems so far away. I mean, I didn't identify with the king when I first read that story. I didn't think, oh, that's me. And yet, how often, not knowing, he doesn't know about the clouds. He doesn't know what the scarf is made from. He just wants what he wants, and he doesn't care to know. How often do we do that? Say the easy yes that Cynthia Ozick is talking about in that essay without thinking of the bigger picture. Societally, we are addicted to yes, and we rail against the limits, and we fall for idols like the idea that economic growth is an unconditional good. Certainly, it's a good up to a point. We all need enough healthy food, clean water, adequate shelter, time for recreation and leisure. A few months ago, I shared some statistics about how there is less hunger in the world. There is dramatically less thirst and easy to cure diseases in the world. It's good to have material growth and benefit, but in our country, particularly, we take it too far. In America, there's a bedroom that's so full of teddy bears that there's no place to sit down. You might not even be able to open the door. It's so crammed. Our consumption of resources has gone so beyond what is necessary and good for human flourishing that is now threatening our ability to flourish or even to survive. It's like we're standing on that hill as the little boy sadly singing, "Enough is enough and not one stitch more." And it's brought us in a climate crisis. And we might feel like we haven't felt the downside of that yet in our own lives, or maybe we have. As each year progresses, we feel it more and more. Certainly, though, it's been happening, particularly for those who are the most marginalized, for years, decades even. I want to talk just briefly about the roots of the climate crisis. And I want to say that colonialism is the roots of the climate crisis, and it's still happening. So let me just define colonialism in a nutshell as the conquest of one people by another through the use of economic growth and prosperity and the use of military force. It's when one group has enough wheat to feed the colonial soldier and settler and then they can exploit that wealth in guns that they use to subjugate, massacre, remove, or enslave other peoples around the world. That's happened in the colonial area. That's colonialism in a nutshell. The use of military force to bring prosperity to some at the expense of others. I want to say that this is why we can't get common sense gun laws passed right there. We know that our wealth and prosperity, at least in part, comes from those weapons. So we have made an idol of them, and we're still gripping them and unable to let go, even when they're not serving us, even when they are causing tragedy after tragedy. The other thing I want to stress is that the big thing that we're saying no to is any absolutes, making idols of any absolutes. So I'm not saying that there are no benefits. Please hear me. I listed some of the benefits that have come from Western civilization to the rest of the world, along with colonialism, right? Along with the bad things. So I'm not saying that we say yes to any absolutes. In fact, that's precisely what I'm saying, is that we say no, just like Cynthia Ozick says, to any absolutes. I've had some challenging interpersonal interactions recently, over the last couple of months, multiple ones. And I've noticed I have this tendency to tell the story of those interpersonal interactions in a particular way. I tell the story about how I avoided having to be forceful and having to have moments of conflict, having to call people out when they're behaving badly. And I emphasize the ways that I gently, almost imperceptibly, lifted up for the person a different way of being, a new way of seeing things, like a magic trick. And that's true. I have actually been able to do that, right? To be gentle and thoughtful in how I'm engaging in those interpersonal relationships and really love the person as I gently show them maybe there's other possibilities, right? Every time I tell one of these stories, as soon as I am back with myself, I get off the phone, I get out of the meeting, I think about the other moments in that same interaction when was a different moment when I just said no. When I said, actually, I think that's wrong. Actually, don't do that, you're hurting someone. Right? But I never tell that part. It's harder to tell that part, it's harder to do that part, and it's not one or the other, right? Do you see what I'm getting at? Gentleness should not be an idol. Forcefulness should not be an idol. The question is, in each moment, what do we say yes to and what do we say no to? And then we're in the next moment. And what do we say yes to and what do we say no to? In a dynamic interplay with the world. Not a bowing down to any idol of any particular way of being that is always the answer. There are times when the answer is yes, but there are also times when the answer is no. I really want to keep the focus on the societal level, but I want to say one thing more about how this plays out in community. That welcome table, right? We, particularly as Unitarian Universalists, are so committed to being welcoming and inclusive. So we have to be careful about how we actually do that in a way that doesn't create a shadow of non-inclusivity. So how that sometimes happens is that we're so welcoming, we say, we're going to sit at the welcome table, come on in. And we allow harmful behaviors to happen in our communities. And they might not be huge harmful things. It might be just a little bit of gossip over here that then spreads, but then there's a narrative going and you can't reel it back in. It's already spread and people have already bought into it. It might be just a comment that somebody makes in coffee hour and you see the little twitch on somebody's face that lets you know that that comment hurt that person, but you don't say anything. You don't say anything to the person who was hurt to help them process it. You don't say anything to the other person to say, I think maybe that was a little bit, whatever, harsh, sexist, racist, who knows, right? We don't necessarily call those things out. And we think we're being welcoming and inclusive. But we need to remember that when we say yes to those harmful behaviors, when we don't say no to them, we're also saying yes to the harm, right? That we need to say no to those behaviors in order to be protectors. Similarly to societally, how we have to say no to environmentally unsustainable behaviors because those behaviors are causing harm. Saying no to them is saying yes to care, compassion, love, protection. I just want to say I wrote this particular sermon a few years ago. I've revised it a little bit. Nobody did anything in this congregation like yesterday or last week or 2 weeks ago, and I'm like, I'm going to preach this sermon and this is general wisdom, okay? I'm not saying that anything in particular is going on, but I know that some of these things are going on because we're human, right? And we are in a practice of listening to that voice and learning always. So this is just another step and a reminder to keep asking the question, is this the loving, protective, wise, compassionate response in this moment? Yes or no? New moment, new moment, new moment. So, may we listen for the no. May we practice honoring healthy limits. May we, when we need to, embody a fierce protector energy. May we use the power of no to protect our own well-being, to protect the well-being of our communities, to protect the well-being of the earth and all the people on the earth, especially those frontline communities that are most directly impacted by the injustice of climate change. May it be so, and may we be among those who make it so.
As we extinguish our chalice, I invite you to join me now in our community blessing with these words of David Bumbaugh.
This church is dedicated to the proposition that behind all our differences and beneath all our diversity, there is a unity that makes us one and binds us forever together in spite of time, death, and the space between the stars. We pause now in silent witness to that unity. I send you out into the day with this call to listen to that still small voice and to keep listening to that still small voice and to always be in the question. May it be so. Happy Sunday, everyone.